The first sign of trouble came as an eerie hush swept over the colony. The hum of the energy fields and the steady thrum of machinery grinding to life abruptly faltered. A cold wind stirred the dust of Lyra 6, a desolate mining outpost, and for a moment, all 800 colonists stood frozen, as if in unspoken agreement. Aidan Sloane, his back to the dying light of the twin moons, stared out into the horizon. Something was wrong in a way he couldn't explain. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled as he squinted, his military instincts sharpening. It was then that they appeared, great, twisting shadows that cut through the dull orange sky like blade-like specters. Ships, no warships, loomed in the distance, coming fast. Their sleek, dark shapes had an almost organic quality, like living creatures, alive with menace. They were coming for them. The loudspeaker crackled, the voice of Lieutenant Calrus cutting through the thickening silence. Evacuation procedures, now? I repeat, evacuation procedures. Aidan's hands clenched into fists. The people of Lyra 6 were civilians, miners, not soldiers. Most had never even seen combat. He took one last glance at the sky, where the alien ships continued to close the distance. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. This wasn't just an invasion, it was something worse. Captain, we need to move! Nara Miles' voice broke through his thoughts. She was standing at the doorway of his command station, a scientist by title, but in that moment, a warrior by necessity. Her eyes locked onto his, filled with urgency. The artifact beneath the mines, it's not just a research project anymore. The Ithar, they're after it. Aidan's stomach twisted. He had suspected something was wrong with the relic Nara, and her team had uncovered 2 weeks prior. It was too old, too dangerous to be a mere relic. We need to get the civilians out, now. The rest can wait. Nara's jaw tightened. She was afraid. Aidan could see it in the way her hands shook, though she tried to hide it. Aidan, we can't let them take it. If they get their hands on it, this war will be over before we even fire a shot. The Ithar. An ancient and ruthless species, known across the galaxy for their brutal conquests. It was no secret that their thirst for power knew no bounds. Aidan had faced them before, brief encounters during border skirmishes, but he never imagined one of their fleets would turn toward humanity's frontier so soon. The silence was broken by a single, loud crack, like the sound of an enormous thunderclap, but sharper, metallic. A heavy impact, followed by the unmistakable rattle of an explosion. The shockwave hit them seconds later, sending the walls of the command station shaking. The colony's defenses were already crumbling. Move now! Aidan barked, snapping into action. He grabbed Nara's arm, pulling her toward the escape route. The alarm blared overhead, the shrill sound of panic creeping through the corridors. The air was thick with the scent of burning fuel and dust. I can't leave it behind, Aidan. Nara's voice was laced with desperation. I'll go with the others, but I have to protect the artifact. You don't know what it could do. It's not just a weapon, it's the weapon. Aidan stopped dead in his tracks. His fingers dug into his palms, and for a moment, he considered arguing. But the Ithar were relentless. If they captured the artifact, they would have more than a weapon, they would have the power to control entire star systems. You'll be dead before you can even use it, Nara, Aidan said, the weight of his words hanging in the air. He pulled his communicator from his belt and spoke into it. Lieutenant Calrus, status report on civilian evacuation. The static buzzed, and Calrus's voice crackled back, strained. Half the colony's been taken, the Ithar are already inside the compound. We're trying to regroup. There's too many of them. Nara's eyes widened. We have to stop them. If they reach the mines, the artifact is gone. The war, everything is lost. Aidan cursed under his breath. He knew she was right. The Ithar had the firepower to tear apart any defense they could muster, but they hadn't come for the people, they'd come for the artifact. And if they got it, all would be lost. Then we fight, Aidan said, his voice low and determined. Get to the mines. We'll slow them down. Before Nara could protest, Aidan grabbed her shoulder and stared into her eyes, his jaw set in grim resolve. I'll protect you. We'll protect everyone. But just as they moved toward the exit, the doors slammed open with a violent crash. The light flickered, and a cold, unnatural presence filled the air. A figure in the doorway stood, his silhouette barely visible, obscured by the dust and smoke. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, the man took a step forward. His features were hidden by the black mask he wore, but his eyes gleamed with purpose. I can take it from here. The man's voice was raspy, low, but confident. You'll need more than that to stop them. Aiden froze, his mind racing. This man, who was he? Was he one of the resistance, or another soldier lost to the war? Whatever he was, Aiden didn't have time to question. They needed allies now. With a final glance at Nara, Aiden nodded. Let's move. We'll hold the line. And with that, they rushed toward the heart of the battle, the masked stranger shadowing them like a silent specter. The tremors of distant explosions rattled the walls of Lyra SIX's command center. Aiden Sloan, his heart thudding in his chest, clenched the rifle in his hands and scanned the wreckage. The Ithar had breached the outer perimeter in a matter of hours. Their relentless assault had already overwhelmed the colony's defense grids, leaving only pockets of resistance. They weren't just after resources. No, something far more dangerous was at stake. Nara Miles had been right. The artifact beneath the mines wasn't just a relic, it was a weapon. And if the Ithar got their hands on it, humanity's fight for survival would be over. We have to hold them off. Aiden growled to the few soldiers who remained. His voice was hoarse from the dust in the air, but his words were firm. We can't let them get to the mines. Nara, her face streaked with grime and sweat, stepped beside him, her eyes wild with determination. The tension in the air was thick, each passing second counted. Aiden, I've been working on a way to sabotage their main power grid, she said, her breath short. It could buy us some time, but I need access to their core systems. Aiden nodded. We'll get you there. Just tell me what you need. Before Nara could respond, the distant sound of a heavy impact rumbled through the ground, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots stomping across the rubble-strewn streets. The Ithar forces had arrived in full force. Stay sharp, Aiden commanded, pulling Nara behind a shattered barricade. The rest of the survivors scrambled to get into position, some trying to set up makeshift barricades, others tending to the wounded. There was no time to mourn. There would be no future for them unless they fought. The figure in the mask had already disappeared into the chaos. He had not spoken since his initial appearance, but his presence was as unsettling as it was reassuring. He moved like a shadow, swift and deadly, his black armor blending into the environment. Aiden had seen the destruction he left in his wake. Ithar soldiers dropped in a blur, their weapons shattered or thrown aside. Whoever he was no stranger to warfare. Captain, Calrus's voice crackled through the comms. We've lost the northern perimeter. They're pushing through the east gates now. We can't hold them much longer. Aiden's teeth ground together. They were being pushed back, and if they couldn't buy time, they would be overwhelmed. He looked at Nara, who was already pulling up a series of blueprints and schematics, her hands trembling with barely contained urgency. The core systems are underground, she explained, near the central reactor. The problem is getting there. The main access tunnels are compromised. Aiden cursed under his breath. They had two options: retreat and leave the artifact to the enemy, or fight their way into the heart of the Ithar assault and give Nara the chance she needed. The latter meant certain death for most of them. But what other choice did they have? They couldn't let the Ithar control the artifact. Let's make our stand at the tunnels, he decided, voice steady. We fight our way through, and we make sure Nara gets to the core. The sounds of distant Ithar chatter grew louder as their soldiers moved into position. The enemy had numbers, superior firepower, and technology far beyond anything humanity had developed. But humanity had something else, something the Ithar would never understand. The drive to protect, to resist, no matter the odds. We'll take them head on, Aiden said, turning to face his ragtag group of soldiers and civilians. Their faces were weary, yet resolute. We do this together. We hold the line. For the people of Lyra 6. The survivors nodded, and Nara, her hands no longer shaking, gave him a firm look. I'll make it. But Aiden. She hesitated, locking eyes with him. Be careful. He nodded, already turning back to the task at hand. We'll make it. The group split into two teams. Aiden led the first into the streets, firing from behind cover as they advanced. The sounds of combat filled the air, the whine of plasma rifles and the eerie hum of Ithar energy shields as they began to close in. But despite the overwhelming odds, they pressed forward. The masked man was with them, slipping through the chaos like a ghost, taking out soldiers with lethal precision. He was a blur of motion, appearing here, vanishing there, each strike a deadly whisper. Aiden didn't have time to wonder about his motives. He was here, and that was all that mattered. As they neared the tunnel entrance, Aiden's heart raced. The thumping of Ithar war drums echoed through the ground, a rhythmic reminder that time was running out. He signaled to his team, and they began to break into the access tunnels, with Nara close behind. The masked man appeared by his side. I'll cover you, he said, his voice low and strangely calm. He didn't wait for a response. Aiden couldn't argue even if he wanted to. They needed all the help they could get. With Nara safely ahead, Aiden and the masked man made a final stand at the tunnel entrance, fending off waves of Ithar soldiers. Each moment stretched on, a battle between survival and annihilation. Their firepower was superior, their tactics ruthless, but they weren't used to this. They weren't used to humanity's will to fight. The Ithar were relentless, but Aiden knew one thing with certainty: humans would not go down without a fight. We're almost there, Nara shouted from ahead, her voice echoing down the dark, narrow passage. I need more time! Aiden turned, locking eyes with the masked man, a silent understanding passing between them. This was their last stand. They would hold the line. Then, the ground beneath their feet trembled again, but this time it wasn't just an explosion. It was the unmistakable sound of something massive descending from the sky. It was them, the Ithar command ship, coming in for the final strike. The ground beneath Aiden's boots trembled violently as the Ithar command ship descended, its vast shadow stretching across the colony like a specter of death. The massive vessel, designed to intimidate and crush all resistance, hovered ominously above the ruins of Lyra 6. Its silhouette was a jagged, nightmarish shape, covered in chitinous armor and glistening like some predatory insect. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The world held its breath. Aiden squeezed his rifle tighter, his knuckles white. They were running out of time, and Nara, his only hope of stopping this madness, was deeper in the mines, inching closer to the artifact's core systems. The tunnel ahead of them stretched like a yawning abyss, the low hum of ancient technology pulsing through the stone walls, a far cry from the chaos above. We can't keep this up, Calrus shouted from behind him, his voice grating with strain. They've got us pinned down. The core is still a kilometer away. The ship's weapons are active, they'll level everything in their path. Aiden's eyes flickered to the distant horizon, where dark shapes, Ithar soldiers, crept closer. Even with the masked man at their side, their chances of survival seemed slimmer with every passing second. Hold your positions! Aiden barked, then turned to face the masked man, who was now scanning the battlefield with unnatural focus. His eyes, hidden behind the dark visor, were as unreadable as ever, but Aiden could feel the tension in the air as the stranger prepared for whatever would come next. Do we have a plan, or are we just hoping for a miracle? Aiden asked, though he already knew the answer. The masked man gave a short nod, a single word leaving his lips. Distract. Aiden understood immediately. This wasn't about winning. It was about buying time, long enough for Nara to complete her mission. But at what cost? We can't let them reach the mines, Aiden said, the grim reality of the situation sinking in. The masked man didn't speak again. He was already moving, sliding through the wreckage with supernatural agility. His movements were fluid, effortless, as though he knew the exact path through the chaos. Get to the tunnel entrance! Aiden shouted to the remaining fighters. We hold it as long as we can. He followed the masked man's lead, stepping over rubble and wounded civilians, his mind racing. The distant sounds of Ithar weaponry echoed through the air, mixed with the sharp reports of their rifles. The ground shook again as the Ithar command ship released a volley of deadly projectiles that tore through the landscape, reducing everything in their path to smoldering ruins. Nara's face flashed in his mind. He had promised her he'd protect her. But now, as the ground buckled beneath him and the alien war machine above them loomed like a guillotine, he realized how hollow that promise felt. She was on her own, and the fate of their people was in her hands. Just hold on, Nara, he thought, gritting his teeth as he dashed toward the tunnel's entrance. The masked man's voice crackled through his comms, deep and steady. The ship's primary weapon is charging. Aiden's heart skipped a beat. The Ithar weren't going to waste time. They were going to scorch the surface, obliterate everything in their path. He needed to get to Nara. Take out the heavy artillery! Aiden shouted to his team, signaling the assault unit. We don't have time to waste. But even as he said it, he knew it was futile. Their forces were scattered, their coordination non-existent. The Ithar had them pinned down from all sides, and their sheer firepower outmatched anything the humans had left. Then the masked man did something Aiden hadn't expected. He charged. In a blur of motion, the mysterious figure sprinted toward the Ithar heavy artillery units, giant, insectoid walkers that were designed to rip through reinforced bunkers. Aiden watched, stunned, as the masked man dove into the fray, using his sleek, armored form to dodge the fire from the walkers. With fluid precision, he launched grenades, sending shockwaves through the air. The Ithar soldiers turned on him, firing their weapons, but he was always one step ahead, evading, countering, and tearing through their ranks with brutal efficiency. Aiden felt his breath catch in his throat. The man was unstoppable. But this wasn't just an assault. This was a distraction. The masked man's actions drew the Ithar force's attention away from the tunnels, giving Aiden's team a chance to break through. Move now! Aiden yelled as he sprinted toward the tunnel's entrance, the sharp scent of ionized air and burning debris filling his nostrils. The rest of the team followed, their footsteps pounding in unison as they dove into the cold, dim passageway. The world above seemed to disappear as they descended into the depths. The tunnel's cool walls closed in around them, and the sounds of battle grew muffled, but Aiden couldn't shake the weight in his chest. They were running out of time. A few hundred meters in, they came to a dead end, an ancient doorway sealed tight by a rusted metal door, its locks and seals long dormant. Nara's voice crackled through Aiden's comms. I've reached the core, but I can't override the security without. Before she could finish, the ground beneath their feet trembled, followed by a deafening crack. The tunnel walls shuddered as something massive bore down on them. Aiden turned to the masked man, whose stance had grown rigid, his gaze far away as if sensing something he couldn't explain. It's too late, the masked man muttered, his voice barely audible over the growing roar. The ground shook again, stronger this time. The Ithar had sent something bigger, something that could obliterate the entire tunnel system. Aiden's stomach churned as the truth became clear. They were about to face their final battle. The sound of the ground cracking open beneath Aiden's feet felt like the prelude to an inevitable end. The tunnel shook with a deep, reverberating growl, a seismic thrum that tore through the earth itself, as though the very bones of Lyra 6 were being cracked open. Move! Now! Aiden shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He grabbed Nara's arm, yanking her toward the nearest side passage as debris rained down around them. The door they had come to was still sealed, the systems down, but the shaking only intensified, and the tunnel was rapidly becoming unstable. From the shadows, the masked man appeared, his expression unreadable beneath his helmet. His movements were precise, calculated, even in the face of the impending disaster. The ground shuddered again, sending a fresh cascade of rock tumbling from above, blocking the passage behind them. We can't keep running, Aiden said, his voice tight with urgency. Whatever's coming for us, we have to face it now. The masked man didn't reply. He was already pulling a device from his belt, a strange, glowing sphere that flickered with a dark energy Aiden couldn't quite place. He activated it, and a series of mechanical limbs unfurled from the sphere, extending like spider legs. The device buzzed to life, sending a low hum through the air. "This will slow them down," the masked man muttered. "But it won't stop them for long." "What are you?" Aiden began, but his question was cut short by another deafening crash. The entire tunnel seemed to roar in protest, the walls groaning as if they were being torn apart from the inside. Nara's face was a mask of determination. She stepped forward, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "The artifact is close, Aiden. I need to get to the core systems, now. If I can initiate the shutdown sequence, we might still have a chance." Aiden turned toward her, his heart hammering. They had no choice. She was the key to everything. "We'll cover you. Just get to it." Without another word, Nara darted ahead, the glow of her data pad lighting the dim corridor. The masked man followed closely behind her, his weapon poised and ready. Aiden took one last look back. The tunnel was crumbling, the Ithores assault ships overhead. The ship's primary cannon was ready to fire again, its massive silhouette blocking out the sky, casting everything in shadow. They had seconds left. "We hold them here," Aiden said, stepping forward, his rifle aimed at the darkness ahead. "We don't let them through." The first wave came fast, Ithar soldiers, sleek and armored, their long, segmented limbs moving with a predator's grace. They advanced with relentless speed, their weapons charging as they drew closer. Aiden squeezed the trigger. The blast rang out, and one soldier crumpled to the ground, but the others advanced without hesitation. There was no fear in them, only cold efficiency. The masked man was already moving, silent and deadly. His blade, long and curved, sliced through the air, cutting down an Ithar soldier with a single strike. His movements were so fast, so precise, it was as if the Ithar soldiers didn't even have time to react before they were dispatched. Aiden watched, amazed and horrified in equal measure. This was no ordinary warrior. As the last Ithar soldier fell, the floor beneath them rumbled once again. The hum of the massive Ithar ship grew louder, almost deafening now. Aiden looked up just in time to see the ship's cannon powering up. "Nara!" he shouted. "Hurry!" The walls of the tunnel vibrated as the massive ship fired. The blast struck with a bone-rattling force, sending a shockwave down the passage. Aiden's vision blurred as the blast ricocheted off the walls, throwing him to the ground. His ears rang, and the air was thick with smoke and dust. Then silence. For a brief moment, there was nothing but the oppressive quiet that followed the devastation. Aiden struggled to his feet, his body aching from the impact. His hand instinctively reached for his rifle, but it was gone, lost in the blast. He cursed under his breath, trying to steady himself as he peered through the smoke. The masked man was already up, moving with uncanny speed. His helmet scanned the surrounding area, his posture taut and ready for anything. "Stay low," he said, his voice cold and calm. "They'll be coming again." Aiden nodded, adrenaline surging through his veins. He could hear the Ithar regrouping. They were relentless, but they had something else to worry about now, the artifact. A low mechanical whine echoed down the tunnel, followed by the unmistakable hiss of the Ithars reinforcements. There were more of them, much more. Nara was still ahead, her fingers flying across her device, her face set in grim concentration. Aiden could see the anxiety in her eyes, but she didn't slow down. She had come too far. They all had. "It's almost done," she muttered to herself, though it was clear she was trying to reassure herself as much as anyone else. "Tell us when you're ready," Aiden called out to her, his voice steady despite the rising panic within him. Nara gave him a small nod, but her face was strained. The weight of the task ahead was starting to show. She was running out of time. Suddenly, the air was filled with a loud, screeching noise as the Ithar forces surged forward. Aiden's pulse quickened. There was no time left. This was it. For humanity's future, for Lyra 6, they had to hold the line, one last time. Aiden lifted his rifle, determination setting in his chest. This ends now. And with that, they charged into the fray.